Be me. 26, junior accountant at a mid-sized firm. Nothing remarkable about me. Show up, do the work, go home. Company has this unspoken rule: men always offer their seats to women in meeting rooms. Nobody wrote it down anywhere, nobody enforced it either. It just happened. Like gravity, I had been doing it since day one. Never questioned it, assumed it was just being polite. The way you hold a door or say please. Then Rachel arrived, new manager, transferred from the city branch, master's degree in organizational behavior. Sharp, composed, speaks like every sentence was rehearsed once. Not in a fake way, just in a prepared way. First week she sits in on a team meeting. Watches 3 men stand up, hand gesture toward empty chairs. 3 women sit down without a word. Rachel writes something in her notebook. Second week she calls it out, says in the team meeting, calmly, says this seat offering behavior is worth examining. Says it looks like politeness, functions like a signal that women need accommodation. That they cannot compete on equal ground. Half the room nods. The other half looks like they just got told breathing wrong. I am in the second half, not because I disagree. More because I never thought of it that way. It was just something I did, like most things men do without thinking. She quotes someone, cannot remember who, says benevolent sexism is the velvet glove on the iron fist. Someone near me mutters under their breath. Says he was just being nice. The meeting ends. People filter out quietly, the kind of quiet that means everyone has opinions. And nobody wants to say them out loud yet. That evening I think about the seat thing longer than I should. Think about David, guy sit near, 6'3", broad as a doorframe. Has chronic back problems from a car accident years ago. Never once in 3 years did anyone offer him a seat. He just stood every single meeting, because men stand, because men endure. Because nobody asks if the big guy is okay. Nobody ever saw David and thought he might need help. Nobody ever saw me and thought that either. We were just fine by default, fine until proven broken. Sit with that for a few days. Rachel schedules a lunch talk the following week. Topic: dismantling workplace gender norms. Attendance is voluntary. About 15 people show up anyway. Which for a voluntary lunch talk is basically the whole office. She is genuinely good at this. Walks through historical data on promotion rates. Shows the gap in performance reviews between men and women with identical outputs. Women described as aggressive for the same behavior men get called decisive for. The data is real. The pattern is undeniable. I respect her for showing the numbers instead of just the feeling. Numbers are harder to dismiss, even when people try. Then she gets to a slide about male allyship. Says men need to stop centering their feelings in feminist discourse. Says when women talk about their experiences, it is not an invitation to debate. Says listening is the action, seems reasonable in theory. But then Marcus raises his hand. Marcus works in operations, quiet guy, thinks before he speaks. He asks about the male suicide rate, asks about workplace fatality statistics. Asks why those are not part of the feminist conversation about gender harm. The room gets a different kind of quiet. Rachel pauses, says those are important issues. Says they deserve their own dedicated conversation. Says this space is specifically for women's experiences right now. Marcus nods slowly, puts his hand down, does not argue. But that pause, that redirect, that careful sidelining of the question. It said something even Rachel did not intend to say. After the talk I catch Marcus by the coffee machine. Ask him what he thought, he says. It is always a separate conversation. Says he has been hearing that for years. Says separate eventually starts to feel like never. I do not have a good response to that, so I just nod. I keep going to the lunch talks though. Not to argue, just to listen and think, which Rachel said was the point anyway. A few weeks in I noticed something about the office social dynamic. The women have a group chat. They organize lunches together, celebrate promotions, share opportunities. It is worn and visible and supported. Nothing wrong with it. Community is genuinely good. But the many together sometimes too. Same behavior, quieter version, nobody organizes it, it just happens. For guys end up at the same table and talk about work and games and whatever. Someone calls it a boys club. Says it in passing, half joking, but it lands. The implication is exclusionary. The implication is conspiratorial. Same behavior, different label, depending on the gender of the people doing it. Think about that more than I should. Company announces new mentorship program, specifically structured for women pursuing leadership roles. Funded, organized, with dedicated senior mentors assigned. It is a good initiative. The numbers justify it. Women at director level and above are sparse here. I apply anyway, to the general pool. Told the resources are currently allocated to the priority cohort. Told to check back next quarter comes. Program is still running for the same cohort. Told to check back again. I do not complain. I understand why the program exists. I understand what equity means in practice. Some people start behind and need more support to reach the same line. But also, I am 26, first person in my family with a professional job. No connections, no network, no uncle who played golf with the right people. Just me and a degree I am still paying off, the structural advantage men supposedly carry. I cannot find it in my bank account, or in my apartment, or in my lack of mentorship. Wonder if equity means I pay for a debt I did not personally take out. Wonder if that is just what justice costs sometimes. Do not have the answer. Genuinely do not. Rachel notices I'm quieter than usual one afternoon. Asks if something is up. I tell her, honestly. About the mentorship thing. About Marcus's question. About David's back. About the lunch table that got called a woes club. She listens without interrupting, which I did not expect. Then she says something I did not expect either. She says feminism was never designed to make men comfortable. Says discomfort is a feature, not a malfunction. Says the system was comfortable for men for a very long time. And now it is adjusting. I say I hear that. I say I believe the adjustment is necessary. But I also say there is a difference between discomfort and invisibility. She tilts her head slightly. I tell her about David standing for 3 years. Tell her nobody ever saw that as a problem worth naming. Tell her the men in that office absorb a lot quietly, and the silence is not strength. It is just trained suppression with no release valve. She is quiet for a moment, says, that is a real blind spot. Says it plainly, without hedging. First time, I felt like I was not asking the wrong question. She adds a new agenda item to the next lunch talk, calls it, Who Does Feminism Forget? Does not explain it further. Just puts it on the schedule. More people show up to that one. Rachel opens with a question. Asks, who does the current conversation about gender leave behind? Nobody says just women. Nobody says just men either. The answers are more complicated than that. Claire speaks first. She is one of the senior women in the office, mid-30s, 2 kids. Says she hates that her husband cannot show grief at work. Says she watched him lose his father last year. Took 2 days bereavement leave and came back in a suit. No one asked how he was doing. She had to ask on his behalf because he could not. Marcus speaks after, says the rate at which men die in this industry from overwork and stress is treated as a quirk of ambition rather than a systemic failure. Says when women burn out it is called a crisis. When men burn out they get a posthumous award and a plaque. David speaks for the first time in months. Quietly says he stood in meetings for 3 years with a bad back. Says he never once thought he could mention it. Says it never occurred to him that anyone would care. Room sits with that for a second. Rachel writes on the whiteboard. She writes, liberation is not a finite resource, underlines it twice. Someone in the back says, then why does it feel like a competition? Rachel says, because we built it on a framework of opposition. Says us versus them was useful for getting people angry enough to move. Says anger is good fuel but a terrible map. Says at some point the map has to change. This is the first lunch talk where nobody walks out looking defensive. People just look tired and a little relieved. Like they had been holding something heavy. And the room finally gave them permission to put it down temporarily. I walk back to my desk thinking about the seat thing again, from a different angle this time. Maybe offering a seat was never about seeing women as weak. Maybe for men it was one of the only permitted softnesses. One of the only ways the culture allowed men to be considerate. Because everything else had to be hard and silent and endured. Question the gesture, fine, but understand what you are also dismantling when you do. The loophole, not just the limitation. Weeks pass. The lunch talks become a standing thing. Rachel does not always lead them anymore. Sometimes Marcus does, sometimes Claire. Once David did it, awkwardly, reading from notes. It was the best one. Someone asks Rachel directly one session, asks if she thinks men have it harder now because of feminism. She does not flinch, says no, says harder in ways feminism did not intend, yes. Says there is a difference between redistributing power and just shuffling who absorbs the damage. Says the goal was never to swap positions, says the goal was to stop mandatory suffering. Says we have not figured out how to do that for men yet. Says she does not think that is feminism's fault exactly, says it is more like an incomplete project. Marcus says, incomplete is generous. Rachel says, incomplete is honest. I think about my dad on the drive home. Grew up watching him work 6 days a week. Never complained, never cry, never said it was too much. I asked him once if he liked his job. He looked at me like I had asked if he liked gravity. It was not a question he had ever been allowed to ask himself. I wonder what feminism would have done for my dad. Whether it ever thought about men like him, men who were not abusing power, just surviving inside a role they never chose. Probably not, at least not directly. And maybe that is okay. Maybe every movement has limits. Maybe the work is in knowing what those limits are. I get assigned a mentor eventually, guy named Frank. Retired partner, comes in twice a month, no nonsense. First thing he says, the best thing that happened to this firm was women entering it. Says it without prompting, unprovoked. I ask him why. He says when women started naming what was wrong, men got something they had never had before. A vocabulary for the same things they had been experiencing silently. A permission structure to say, this is not sustainable. He says before that, men just quit or drank or disappear, and everyone called it a midlife crisis. And nothing changed. I write that down. Do not usually write things down. Think about the men I know who disappeared quietly. Guy from college, smart, funny, just stopped showing up one day. Nobody organized a search or a check-in. He was fine, turned out, moved back home. But nobody knew that for months because nobody asked. Think about how feminism built language for women's pain, and how men's pain is still mostly mute. Not because it is less real, but because it never got named. And unnamed things cannot be treated. That feels like a feminist issue to me, not despite feminism. Because of what feminism showed was possible, and you name a thing. End of year review. Rachel gives me strong marks. Says I ask better questions than most people twice my age. Says that is rarer than technical skill. I thank her and mean it. She asks me off the record what I think the company still gets wrong. I think about it for a second. Said, it treats equity like a math problem. Say you add women, subtract male dominance, the equation balances. Say it forgets that you have to also change what success looks like. Otherwise you just have more people competing in the same broken race. She nods slowly, writes something in her notebook. Same move she made on day, on watching men give up chairs. I wonder if I just became a data point. Then I realize that is fine. Data points are how things change. Last lunch talk of the year, Rachel asks everyone to write one anonymous thing on a card. One assumption about the other gender you now question. She collects them, shuffles them, reads them without editorial. One says, I assumed men were fine unless proven otherwise. One says, I assumed women wanted to be taken care of. One says, I assumed asking for help was embarrassing. One says, I assumed feminism was a zero-sum game. One says, I assumed silence in men meant agreement. One says, I assumed my discomfort was the movement's problem, not mine. One says, I assumed the system protected me just because it was built by people who looked like me. She reads every card. Room is the quietest it has ever been. Not the uncomfortable quiet from that first meeting. This one has more room in it. She pins them all to the board, does not sort them by gender. Just overlapping, random, a mess of small revelations. They stay up for weeks. More cards appear without anyone asking. Someone tapes a new one that just says, still figuring it out. It becomes sort of the center of the whole board. Frank sees them one afternoon. Reads each one slowly, does not say anything. Just nods once and walks back to his office. I think that not held more than he knew how to say. Rachel gets promoted in January. She deserves it, everyone agrees who has worked with her. But someone says it quietly in the break room. Says she only got it because they needed to hit a diversity target. It is a man who says it. It is said like a joke. It is not a joke. Rachel finds out, does not name him publicly. Brings it to the next lunch talk instead, asks the room, what does it feel like to have your achievement attributed to something other than your ability? Marcus answers first, says it feels so like the work disappears. Like you stop being a person and become a talking point. David says he felt that when he was passed over once and assumed it was for equity reasons. Even though he later found out the other candidate had better qualifications, he still assumed, still resented, still looked at her differently for a while, says he is not proud of that. Rachel says, that is the real damage of opaque systems. Says when the criteria are hidden, people fill the gap with whatever they fear most. Says transparency is not just fairness, says it is the only thing that stops resentment from growing in the dark. Nobody disagrees. I think about where I started this year. Guy who gave up chairs without knowing why. Guy who sat in silence because silence felt safer than the wrong question. Think about where I am now, still confused, but usefully confused. The kind that means something is actually moving. Not toward an answer, just toward better questions. Maybe that is what thinking actually looks like from the inside. Not certainty, not winning, just the slow, uncomfortable, necessary process of questioning what you were handed. And realizing the person across from you is in the middle of the same process. MFW nobody had the clean answer. MFW the room kept showing up anyway. MFW that might actually be the whole point.